Daniel Hargrove thought he owned the streets. A badge-wielding bully with a gun and a grudge. Evelyn Carter knew how to face down fear. A retired Army major who'd stared death in the eye and won. On a humid summer night, their paths collided. His temper flared, her resolve held, and a teenage boy named Jamal Harris caught it all on camera. What started as a routine stop spiraled into a viral nightmare, exposing a racist cop's reign of terror and costing him everything in an instant. In a quiet suburban town nestled between rolling hills and sleepy streets, Officer Daniel Hargrove patrolled under the faint glow of a humid summer evening. The air was thick, the kind that clung to your skin and made every breath feel heavy. Hargrove, a stocky man with a buzz cut and a permanent scowl, had been with the police force for 8 long years. His cruiser rolled slowly past neatly trimmed lawns, past houses with flickering porch lights and kids' bikes abandoned on driveways. He wasn't loved by the community. His personnel file was stuffed with complaints about his short temper and aggressive demeanor, though none had ever stuck long enough to cost him his badge. That night his eyes darted from shadow to shadow, searching for anything or anyone out of place. It was a habit, one born from years of suspicion rather than evidence. Meanwhile, Major Evelyn Carter was making her way home in her silver sedan, the engine humming softly as she navigated the familiar roads. At 62, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd seen the world's chaos and come out stronger. She'd just left her daughter's house, where she'd spent the afternoon baking cookies with her grandkids and laughing over old family stories. Her military career spanned 30 years, a journey that took her from dusty training camps to active combat zones, where she'd earned medals for courage under fire. Retirement suited her. She traded fatigues for cardigans, rifles for gardening tools. That evening, she wore a simple blouse and kept her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her hands gripped the wheel lightly, her driving careful and precise. Every turn signal clicked on with purpose. She had no reason to suspect trouble. Hargrove's cruiser crept along a parallel street until his headlights caught the glint of Carter's sedan. There was nothing unusual about it. No speeding, no broken taillights, just a car moving steadily through the dusk. But something about it nagged at him, a gut feeling he couldn't shake. Maybe it was the way the driver sat so upright, or maybe it was just the boredom of a slow shift. He flicked on his siren, a brief wail cutting through the stillness, and watched as the sedan eased to the curb. His boots hit the pavement with a thud as he stepped out, adjusting his belt. What started as a routine stop, one of dozens he'd made that month, was about to unravel into something far darker, something that would change everything in an instant. Major Evelyn Carter sat perfectly still as her silver sedan idled on the side of the road, the faint hum of the engine blending with the chirping crickets outside. Her hands rested calmly on the steering wheel, fingers steady despite the flashing, red and blue lights reflecting in her rearview mirror. At 62, she'd faced worse than a traffic stop. Decades in the Army had taught her how to stay composed under pressure, whether it was dodging bullets in a war zone or staring down a drill sergeant's wrath. She'd retired with honor, her uniform, swapped for civilian life, but the discipline never left her. Now she was just a grandmother heading home, her mind still lingering on the warm hugs from her grandkids earlier that day. The night felt ordinary, until it didn't. Officer Daniel Hargrove approached her window, his flashlight slicing through the dimness like a blade. The beam danced across her face, harsh and unyielding, as he barked for her license and registration. His voice carried an edge, sharp and impatient, as if she'd already done something wrong. Carter moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for her purse with the precision of someone who knew sudden moves could be misread. She handed over the documents, her expression calm but her eyes locked on his, unflinching. That steadiness seemed to rattle him. Hargrove's jaw tightened, his free hand hovering near his hip. He didn't explain the stop, no mention of a broken rule or a safety concern. Instead, he leaned closer, his tone rising as he accused her of looking suspicious, the words dripping with vague menace. Carter's pulse quickened, but her face betrayed nothing. She'd seen men like him before, power-hungry, itching for a fight. Then, in a heartbeat, the situation spiraled. Hargrove's hand dropped to his holster, and with a swift motion, he yanked his gun free, the barrel glinting as he aimed it, squarely at her chest. The air thickened with tension, the quiet night shattered by the threat of violence. Carter froze, her military instincts surging to the surface. She calculated every breath, every twitch, knowing one wrong move could turn this into her last moment. Her mind raced back to battlefields, to split-second decisions between life and death. But this wasn't a war zone. This was a suburban street, and the enemy wore a badge. Hargrove stood there, finger near the trigger, his authority teetering on the edge of something irreversible. Across the street from where Major Evelyn Carter sat pinned by Officer Daniel Hargrove's gun, a teenage boy crouched behind a row of overgrown bushes, his heart pounding in his chest. Jamal Harris, just 16, had been walking home from a friend's house when he spotted the flashing lights of the police cruiser. He knew Hargrove by reputation. Everyone in the neighborhood did. The cop had a habit of stopping kids like Jamal for no reason, his temper flaring over nothing. Curious and a little wary, Jamal pulled out his phone, the screen glowing faintly as he tapped record. The lens zoomed in just as Hargrove drew his weapon, the shaky footage capturing the glint of the barrel under the street lights. Carter's silhouette remained steady in the driver's seat, a stark contrast to the officer's coiled aggression. Jamal's breath caught as he watched through the tiny screen, his thumb trembling but holding the phone steady. He'd seen Hargrove lose it before, once yelling at a group of teens for skateboarding, another time slamming a man against a car hood during a stop. But this was different, heavier. The video rolled on, catching every second of the standoff. Then came the twist. As Carter handed over her license, a small card slipped from her wallet and fluttered onto her lap. It was her Army ID, the faded emblem of her rank still visible. Hargrove snatched it up, his flashlight illuminating the text. Major Evelyn Carter, U.S. Army, retired. His face twisted, a sneer curling his lips as he studied it. Jamal's camera picked up the moment Hargrove's posture stiffened, his grip on the gun tightening instead of easing. The boy's stomach churned as he zoomed closer, the audio faint but enough to catch a muttered word from Hargrove, later dissected online. As a racial slur, raw and venomous, Jamal's hands shook harder. But he kept filming, knowing this was bigger than anything he'd witnessed before. Hargrove shoved the ID back at Carter, his gun still raised, oblivious to the lens tracking his every move. The video cut off abruptly as Jamal ducked lower, hearing Hargrove's boots scuff the pavement. He didn't know it yet, but those 5 minutes of footage were about to ignite a firestorm, one that would burn through the town and beyond, exposing a truth no one could ignore. By the time the sun peeked over the horizon, Jamal's video had already begun its wildfire spread across the internet. He'd uploaded it to social media just after midnight, his hands still shaky from what he'd seen. The clip. 5 minutes. of raw, unfiltered tension, showed Officer Daniel Hargrove pointing his gun at Major Evelyn Carter, her Army ID dismissed with a sneer. Within hours, it racked up thousands of views, then millions. People shared it with furious captions, hashtags like "Justice for Major Carter" and "Racist Cop Trending by Breakfast." The shaky footage looped endlessly online. The gun, the slur, the quiet strength of a 62-year-old black woman staring down a barrel. News outlets pounced, headlines screaming about a decorated Army officer targeted in her own neighborhood. The story wasn't just local anymore, it was global. Public outrage swelled like a tidal wave. Hargrove's name became a lightning rod as strangers dug into his past. Old complaints surfaced. Stories of racial profiling, unnecessary roughness, stops that never made sense. There was the time he'd frisked a black teenager for walking too slow, and another when he'd shoved a Latino man against a wall for asking why he'd been pulled over. The police department had buried it all, slapping his wrist with warnings that never stuck. Now, those buried files were fuel for the fire. Protests erupted outside the station by noon, dozens of people holding signs with Carter's face and demands for accountability. The crowd chanted her name, their voices echoing off the brick walls as TV crews swarmed the scene. Then came the bombshell. A whistleblower from inside the department leaked an internal memo, time-stamped months earlier. It revealed Hargrove had been flagged for mandatory sensitivity training after yet another complaint. Training he'd dodged with excuses and rescheduling. The document hit the internet like a grenade, shredding what little defense the police could muster. The chief's phone rang off the hook with calls from reporters, politicians, even military veterans rallying behind Carter. Online, the videos. View count ticked higher, each share amplifying the pressure. Hargrove's career dangled by a fraying thread, his badge no match for the storm he'd unleashed. The department scrambled, issuing vague statements about ongoing investigations, but the public wasn't buying it. This wasn't just about one stop anymore. It was a reckoning, and the clock was ticking down to its explosive end. The fallout hit like a thunderclap. Within 48 hours of Jamal's video going viral, the police chief stood before a sea of cameras, his face grim and his tie slightly crooked. Flanked by stone-faced deputies, he announced Officer Daniel Hargrove's termination. Effective immediately. No drawn-out hearings, no paid leave, no second chances. The decision was a guillotine, swift and final, driven by the unrelenting tide of public fury and the damning evidence piling up. The leaked memo, the viral footage, the unearthed complaints, they'd left no room for excuses. Protesters outside the station erupted in cheers, their signs bobbing above the crowd as news helicopters buzzed overhead. Hargrove's 8-year career crumbled to dust in an instant, his name now a synonym for disgrace. Major Evelyn Carter broke her silence that same afternoon, stepping into the spotlight with the poise of a soldier. She stood on her front porch, her gray hair catching the sunlight, and faced a cluster of microphones. Her voice was steady as she recounted the stop. How she'd felt the cold weight of fear when Hargrove aimed his gun. How she'd drawn on decades of training to stay calm. She admitted she'd thought of her grandkids in that moment, wondering if she'd see them again. But she refused to let Hargrove's hatred define her. Her words carried a quiet power, resonating with millions, who'd watched her story unfold. The military community rallied behind her, veterans flooding social media with support, calling her a hero twice over. Once in uniform, now in civilian life. Investigators didn't stop with Hargrove's firing. The video had cracked open a wider scandal, prompting a full review of the department's practices. They uncovered a trail of overlooked abuses tied to Hargrove, stops with no justification, reports that never matched reality. His personnel file, once a vault of buried warnings, became a roadmap for reform. Hargrove himself vanished from the town, his house dark and his cruiser gone from the station lot. Rumors swirled that he'd fled to avoid the spotlight. His life upended as quickly as he'd upended Carter's night. The story closed with the mayor delivering,